Chapter 8 of Little Lord Fauntleroy. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by Susan Umpleby. Little Lord Fauntleroy by Frances Hodgson Burnett. Chapter 8. Lord Dorincourt had occasion to wear his grim smile many a time as the days passed by. Indeed, as his acquaintance with his grandson progressed, he wore the smile so often that there were moments when it almost lost its grimness. There is no denying that before Lord Fauntleroy had appeared on the scene, the old man had been growing very tired of his loneliness, and his gout, and his 70 years. After so long a life of excitement and amusement, it was not agreeable to sit alone even in the most splendid room, with one foot on a gout stool and with no other diversion than flying into a rage and shouting at a frightened footman who hated the sight of him. The old Earl was too clever a man not to know perfectly well that his servants detested him, and that, even if he had visitors, they did not come for love of him, though some found a sort of amusement in his sharp, sarcastic talk, which spared no one. So long as he had been strong and well, he had gone from one place to another, pretending to amuse himself, though he had not really enjoyed it. And when his health began to fail, he felt tired of everything and shut himself up at Dorincourt, with his gout and his newspapers and his books. But he could not read all the time, and he became more and more bored, as he called it. He hated the long nights and days, and he grew more and more savage and irritable. And then Fauntleroy came, and when the Earl saw him, fortunately for the little fellow, the secret pride of the grandfather was gratified at the outset. If Cedric had been a less handsome little fellow, the old man might have taken so strong a dislike to him that he would not have given himself the chance to see his grandson's finer qualities. But he chose to think that Cedric's beauty and fearless spirit were the results of the Dorincourt blood and a credit to the Dorincourt rank. And then when he heard the lad talk, and saw what a well-bred little fellow he was, notwithstanding his boyish ignorance of all that his new position meant, the old Earl liked his grandson more, and actually began to find himself rather entertained. It had amused him to give into those childish hands the power to bestow a benefit on poor Higgins. My lord cared nothing for poor Higgins, but it pleased him a little to think that his grandson would be talked about by the country people, and would begin to be popular with the tenantry, even in his childhood. Then it had gratified him to drive to church with Cedric, and to see the excitement and interest caused by the arrival. He knew how people would speak of the beauty of the little lad, of his fine, strong, straight body, of his erect bearing, his handsome face, and his bright hair, and how they would say, as the Earl had heard one woman exclaim to another, that the boy was "every inch a lord." My Lord of Dorincourt was an arrogant old man, proud of his name, proud of his rank, and therefore proud to show the world that at last the house of Dorincourt had an heir who was worthy of the position he was to fill. The morning the new pony had been tried, the Earl had been so pleased that he had almost forgotten his gout. When the groom had brought out the pretty creature, which arched its brown, glossy neck and tossed its fine head in the sun, the Earl had sat at the open window of the library and had looked on while Fauntleroy took his first riding lesson. He wondered if the boy would show signs of timidity. It was not a very small pony, and he had often seen children lose courage in making their first essay at riding. Fauntleroy mounted in great delight. He had never been on a pony before, and he was in the highest spirits. Wilkins, the groom, led the animal by the bridle up and down before the library window. "He's a well-plucked 'un, he is," Wilkins remarked in the stable afterward with many grins. "It weren't no trouble to put him up, and an old 'un wouldn't ha' sat any straighter when he were up. He says he to me, 'Wilkins,' he said, 'am I sittin' up straight?' 'They sit up straight at the circus,' says he. And I says, 'As straight as a arrer, your lordship.' and he laughs as pleased as could be, and he says, 'That's right,' he says. 'You tell me if I don't sit up straight, Wilkins.'" But sitting up straight and being led at a walk were not altogether and completely satisfactory. After a few minutes, Fauntleroy spoke to his grandfather, watching him from the window. "Can't I go by myself?" he asked. "And can't I go faster? The boy on Fifth Avenue used to trot and canter." "Do you think you could trot and canter?" said the Earl. "I should like to try," answered Fauntleroy. His lordship made a sign to Wilkins, who at the signal brought up his own horse and mounted it, and took Fauntleroy's pony by the leading rein. "Now," said the Earl, "let him trot." The next few minutes were rather exciting to the small equestrian. He found that trotting was not so easy as walking, and the faster the pony trotted, the less easy it was. "It jolts a good deal, doesn't it?" he said to Wilkins. "Does it you?" "No, my lord," answered Wilkins. "You'll get used to it in time. Rise in your stirrups." "I'm rising all the time," said Fauntleroy. He was both rising and falling rather uncomfortably, and with many shakes and bounces. He was out of breath and his face grew red, but he held on with all his might and sat as straight as he could. The Earl could see that from his window. When the riders came back within speaking distance, after they had been hidden by the trees a few minutes, Fauntleroy's hat was off, his cheeks were like poppies, and his lips were set, but he was still trotting manfully. "Stop a minute," said his grandfather. "Where's your hat?" Wilkins touched his. "It fell off, your lordship," he said, with evident enjoyment. "Wouldn't let me stop to pick it up, my lord." "Not much afraid, is he?" asked the Earl dryly. "Him, your lordship!" exclaimed Wilkins. "I shouldn't say as he knowed what it meant. I've taught young gentlemen to ride afore, and I never see one stick on more determinder." "Tired?" said the Earl to Fauntleroy. "Want to get off?" "It jolts you more than you think it will," admitted his young lordship frankly. "And it tires you a little, too. But I don't want to get off. I want to learn how. As soon as I've got my breath, I want to go back for the hat." The cleverest person in the world, if he had undertaken to teach Fauntleroy how to please the old man who watched him, could not have taught him anything which would have succeeded better. As the pony trotted off again toward the avenue, a faint color crept up in the fierce old face, and the eyes, under the shaggy brows, gleamed with a pleasure such as his lordship had scarcely expected to know again. And he sat and watched quite eagerly until the sound of the horse's hoofs returned. When they did come, which was after some time, they came at a faster pace. Fauntleroy's hat was still off. Wilkins was carrying it for him. His cheeks were redder than before, and his hair was flying about his ears, but he came at quite a brisk canter. "There!" he panted as they drew up. "I cantered. I didn't do it as well as the boy on Fifth Avenue, but I did it, and I stayed on." He and Wilkins and the pony were close friends after that. Scarcely a day passed in which the country people did not see them out together, cantering gaily on the high road or through the green lanes. The children in the cottages would run to the door to look at the proud little brown pony with the gallant little figure sitting so straight in the saddle, and the young lord would snatch off his cap and swing it at them and shout, "Hullo! Good morning!" in a very unlordly manner, though with great heartiness. Sometimes he would stop and talk with the children, and once Wilkins came back to the castle with a story of how Fauntleroy had insisted on dismounting near the village school, so that a boy who was lame and tired might ride home on his pony. "And I'm blessed," said Wilkins in telling the story at the stables, "I'm blessed if he'd hear of anything else. He wouldn't let me get down, because he said the boy mightn't feel comfortable on a big horse. And says he, 'Wilkins,' says he, 'that boy's lame, and I'm not, and I want to talk to him, too.' And up the lad has to get, and my lord trudges alongside of him with his hands in his pockets and his cap on